All right, last time we came together, we looked at the responses made by the Ottoman Empire to incursions by Western states in their empire. And today we go a little bit further east, and we're going to go and take a look at the remnants of the Mughal Empire, which is found right here, okay, and also the dozens of different princely states and principalities in India today. So again, our examination now of British India as it responds to European imperialism, particularly by the British, but then there's also the French, the Portuguese, and others. But before we do so, a little bit of review. So if you go into your textbooks, go to page 527 and 528, go ahead and explain about the Mughals and their challenges of governance and how they utilize religion, architecture, and the arts as a means to engage and to rule their people. So go ahead and open up your textbooks, go ahead and pause the video right now and answer review question number one. All right, hopefully you guys are back. Let's go ahead and go to question number two. And that will have you go to 583 to 584. Go ahead and identify one method that was used by the British East India Company to rule India. So identify one method that the British East India Company utilized to rule India. So take a look at the text, pause the video, and answer question number two. All right, let's go and get to the British rule over India. Now, what you should have seen is by this juncture, and this is all throughout the history of South Asia that we've examined, is a diverse range of people groups, of religions, of political entities throughout India, and that very few times in its history it was India unified under a single empire and leader. So very rarely does this happen. The Mughals came relatively close, albeit they were in the western half predominantly. There are other political entities that are powerful at this point, including the Maranthas, a number of different Nawabs or princes that are competing for power. Okay? And as the Europeans come into the picture, starting with the Portuguese in Goa, but eventually in other places that were um, taken by the French, the most powerful of which were the British, who ended up defeating the French in a short war. And eventually, the British East India Company is going to start to not just conquer, but make alliances, strike a deal with neighboring princes, the Mughal emperor himself, a number of different methods to expand its influence, using mercenary armies, using diplomats, and so forth, such that by the 19th century, the British East India Company, as it turns out, was the most powerful ruler in South Asia. Okay? However, there would be drastic changes in the middle of the 19th century due to a number of different possibilities, whether it's disaffected peasants, political rulers who felt that they've been usurped by the British authorities, and even rumors that um, pig fat, cow fat was utilized in the rifle cartridges used by Muslim and Indian and Sikh soldiers, many of which found this offensive to be able to put against some uh, the animal fat products in your mouth. It all of a sudden led to what is known as, in many circles, as the Sepoy Mutiny. The Indians will refer to this as the Indian Rebellion of 1857, which was a devastating conflict that did not garner independence by any means, wasn't supported by some of the powerful rulers in India who had aligned themselves with the British. But in the reconstruction of India, out of the Sepoy Mutiny, it was the possession of India by the British government. So the East India Company, in a lot of ways, is pushed aside, and as a result of this, the British government came to directly rule India. And what they established, in a sense, is one of the most efficient bureaucracies, known as the Indian Civil Service, and where you have a small number of British high-level bureaucrats that are in country, but really the country is run by Indians themselves who were trained in order to run the state. And it turns out this became one of the world's greatest pieces of what some people call positive discrimination, whereby there were quotas that were used by the British government that would be reserved for the various castes in India. Again, we go all the way back to ancient Indian history and the various castes and jatis that have divided the society over time. And so, as a result of this, the lower castes will get almost 50% of the British bureaucratic jobs, and that allows them to really move up in society where they've never had before. They would have to take a test, obviously, in order to demonstrate some kind of competence. Okay? But again, it allowed for groups that were marginalized before to actually get a means by which to move up in society. Okay? Many of the defense, both police, military, were sepoy regiments. Again, recruits from the native Indians themselves. Many of them were Sikhs, actually, who ended up joining the British military. Okay? And not only that, but again, a lot of this has to deal with deals that were made by British rulers and local princely states and governments as well. So there are challenges. The Sepoy Mutiny brought about the question as to look, you have an entire state that is run by and also its defense secured by native soldiers. Will that continue? Will that stand the test of time, whereby you have foreign rulers coming in and utilizing local troops to sustain their rule? Not only that, but it was quite a balancing act for the British to be able to balance religions primarily, and the key one is Hinduism and Islam, the different classes and caste structures that still is a part of Hindu society, and the sheer economic differences because the British are going to flout their wealth. Can they control a society whereby it's very clear they're the elites? But they do bring about some benefits to South Asia, in that it is going to connect South Asia with the rest of the globe, and India will become a major producer in natural resources. The production of growing cotton and tea will become an enormous export for India. One other one, opium, which we'll get to in a subsequent lecture regarding China. Okay. India will become a market for British sales and goods, so British manufactured goods come into the picture as well. But not only that, but one of the largest systems of infrastructure, of rail, which I'll get to in a moment, of irrigation. The English school system is utilized here, and again, the civil service, which is going to run all of this together. And in a sense, and here's one of the strange parts, by British rule of India, eh, they in a lot of ways have unified the subcontinent under perhaps a single identity, something that hasn't happened. And you can go all the way maybe back to the Mauryan Empire, which is the closest where you had the entire subcontinent unified. And so the British, in some ways, brought everybody together. Either with the British being a common enemy or a common friend, either way. But either way, there's a sense of unity that's brought about by a British colonization of India. There are some obviously disadvantaged. The obvious one is that Indians don't control their own people in their own state anymore. It's the British. Not only that, but India, which was traditionally the biggest exporter of finished cotton cloth products. And again, people going all the way back to the ancient days are looking at India as a source of this wealth. All of a sudden now, India is now reliant upon uh, growing cash crops, um, and dozens of poor farmers that are now in plantations or low wage rent farmers. And so they're going to struggle economically, uh, at least in terms of the buying power of lower class individuals. And not only that, but there's this constant reminder that they are second class citizens in their own homes. It is British elite that will dominate. Again, a very small number will be in India who will be making the policies, will be the ones really making and garnering the wealth, and really it's supported by the Indians and propped up by native Indians. Not only that, but there's desire, especially among the bureaucracies, businessmen, and others, lawyers who are going to have children who are raising them like British gentlemen, as opposed to, and there's that tradition versus the West, right? The West is this demonstration of wealth and supposed, high culture and so forth, that if you grow up in society, you almost wish and desire to be just like them. Many of you guys who are immigrants to this country, you know the feeling, right? There's your traditional culture, and then there is what you see on TV, for instance. And so there's that struggle for middle class Indians in terms of their particular identity. And so it is not an easy, therefore, um, way to produce this sense of Indian nationalism. Again, we always take for granted. We see a unified country today, and we say, "All right, they're Indians." But again, there are dozens of different ways to identify yourself, and so. This itself, the cause of Indian nationalism, is one that is going to take a lot of work to go through the various religious groups, class groups, those who are loyal to the British, those who are not. And so in 1885, one particular group was formed called the Indian National Congress, made up of mostly middle class Hindus with dreams of trying to create a pan Indian government. In this unit, we looked at sort of these pan movements, right? The pan Arab movement, the pan Slavic movement, using these ethnic identities across state boundaries in order to try to create new nation states. They will be joined by, in some cases, in some ways, they're going to cooperate by the Muslim League. So the another highly influential group is going to form their own organization, and they're going to work with the Indian National Congress at times, and sometimes they'll oppose one another. But this becomes a challenge, and one way to answer our last one, the summary question here, number three, predict the difficulties that Indian independence movement might have in the 20th century. So, based off of this background, in a lot of ways, this is a context question. Hey, if there's a question that talks about Indian independence, hey, what's the context here? Hey, what are the issues that might hamper an Indian independence movement, and why it might possibly need some of the most charismatic individuals to lead India to independence? Okay. All right, guys, I will see you next time.